Silas Stillman Soule, July 26, 1838 to April 23, 1865, was an American abolitionist, Kansas Territory jayhawker, anti-slavery militant, and a friend of John Brown and Walt Whitman. Later, during the American Civil War, he joined the Colorado Volunteers, rising to the rank of captain in the Union Army. Silas Soule was in command of Company D, 1st Colorado Cavalry, which was present at Sand Creek on November 29, 1864, when he refused in order to join the Sand Creek Massacre. During the subsequent inquiry, Soule testified against the massacre's commanding officer, John Chivington, and soon after, he was murdered in Denver, presumably in revenge for this act. Biography: Early life and bleeding Kansas. Silas Soule is one of the immortal 10. Silas Soule was born into a family of abolitionists in Bath, Maine. He was raised in Maine and Massachusetts and, in 1854, his family became part of the newly formed New England Emigrant Aid Company, an organization whose goal was to help settle the Kansas Territory and bring it into the Union as a free state. His father and brother arrived in Kansas, near Lawrence, of which the Soule family was one of the founding families, in November 1854. Silas, his mother and 2 sisters came the following summer. Shortly after the family's arrival at Coal Creek, a few miles south of Lawrence near present-day Vinland, in Massasoule, Silas' father established his household as a stop on the Underground Railroad. At the young age of 17, Silas was escorting slaves, escapees from Missouri, north to freedom. His sister, Anne Julia Soule Prentice, told of her family's early experience in Maine, Massachusetts and Kansas in a 1929 interview. "Our house was on the Underground Railway. John Brown was often there. My brother, Silas, and Brown were close friends. Silas went out on many a foray with him. I recall well when Brown came to our cabin one night with 13 slaves, men, women and children. He had run them away from Missouri. Brown left them with us. Father would always take in all the Negroes he could. Silas took the whole 13 from our home 8 miles to Mr. Grover's stone barn." 1. During these pre-war years, pro-slavery forces from Missouri and abolitionist forces from Kansas were engaged in open warfare. The fight was whether Kansas would be admitted to the Union as a slave or as a free state. This conflict, often called Bleeding Kansas, enhanced the reputation of Silas Soule as a brave and resourceful fighter. In July 1859, Soule was a part of an action on the Missouri border. 20 pro-slavery men had crossed into Kansas to look for escaped slaves. They ambushed a party led by Dr. John Doy, a physician in Lawrence, escorting 13 former slaves, 8 men, 3 women and 2 children toward safety in Iowa. The men from Missouri arrested Doy and sold the former slaves. Doy was soon tried and convicted in Missouri for abducting slaves and sentenced to 5 years in the penitentiary. Soule and a group of other men from Lawrence decided to free Doy. Soule was sent into the jailhouse in St. Joseph where Doy was being held. Soule convinced the jailkeeper that he had a message from Doy's wife. The note, in fact, read tonight, at 12 o'clock. Later that night, they overpowered the jailer, freed Doy, and led him across the Missouri back to Kansas. 2. When they reached Lawrence, they had their photo taken. This photo of the immortal 10, now held by the Kansas State Historical Society, is widely circulated. His skills at prison escapes came into use once again when John Brown was captured after his raid on Harper's Ferry. Brown had decided to become a martyr for the abolitionist cause and allowed himself to be hanged, hoping his death would help bring on a war between North and South, frustrating rescue attempts. Thomas Wentworth Higginson put together a rescue attempt of 2 of Brown's men, Albert Hazlitt and Aaron Stevens, during which Soule posed as a drunken Irishman and got himself arrested. Put into the Charlestown jail, he charmed the jailer and contacted the 2 men, who also refused to be sprung from the jail. Afterwards, Silas traveled to Boston, where he hobnobbed with various abolitionists and befriended the poet Walt Whitman. 3. Life in Colorado and the Civil War. Captain Silas Soule front row, right with Major Edward W. Wynkoop during a peace meeting with the Cheyenne chiefs on September 28, 1864. In May 1860, Soule, along with his brother William L.G., and his cousin, Sam Glass, went to the gold fields in Colorado. "When I arrived here I found a party waiting for me to go to Pikes Peak. My brother and cousin were in the gang going with a quartz machine belonging to Solomon and Parker of Lawrence, and there was no way but I must go. 4. He dug for gold and worked in a blacksmith shop. In 1861, after the breakout of the Civil War, Soule enlisted in Company K, 1st Colorado Infantry, the 1st Regiment of Colorado Volunteers, and took part in the victorious New Mexico Campaign of 1862, including the key Battle of Glorieta Pass. He made his way up the ranks, and in November 1864 was assigned the command of Company D, 1st Colorado Cavalry, the 1st Colorado Volunteer Cavalry Regiment. The Sand Creek Massacre on November 29, 1864, Captain Soule and his company were with the regiment at Sand Creek, Colorado. A fellow abolitionist, Colonel John Chivington, ordered the cavalry to attack Black Kettle's encampment of Cheyenne and Arapaho there. Soule saw that the Cheyenne were flying the Union flag as a sign of peace, and, when told to attack, he and Lieutenant Joseph Kramer V ordered their men to hold their fire and stay put. Most of Chivington's other forces, however, attacked the camp. The resulting action became known as the Sand Creek Massacre, one of the most notorious acts of mass murder in the United States history. Soule described what followed in a letter to his former commanding officer and friend, Major Edward W. Wincoop. "I refused to fire, and swore that none but a coward would, for by this time hundreds of women and children were coming towards us, and getting on their knees for mercy. I tell you, Ned, it was hard to see little children on their knees have their brains beat out by men professing to be civilized. I saw two Indians hold one of another's hands, chased until they were exhausted, when they kneeled down, and clasped each other around the neck and were both shot together. They were all scalped, and as high as half a dozen taken from one head. They were all horribly mutilated. One woman was cut open and a child taken out of her, and scalped. Squaws snatchers were cut out for trophies. You would think it impossible for white men to butcher and mutilate human beings as they did there. 6. The massacre sparked outrage and shock around the country. The Army began an investigation into the battle, and Soule formally testified against Chivington in a court of inquiry in January 1865. His testimony about the events at Sand Creek led, in part, to Congress refusing the Army's request for thousands of men for a general war against the Plains Indians. 7. Marriage on April 1, 1865, Silas married Desiree Hersa Coberly. 89. Just 22 days later, their marriage ended when he was murdered. 8. Death on April 23, 1865, 80 days after testifying, and 3 weeks after getting married, Captain Soule was on duty as a provost marshal in Denver when he went to investigate guns being fired at 10:30 p.m. With his pistol out, Soule went around a corner and faced Charles Squire. Soule fired the first shot and wounded Squire's left arm, but Squire fired a bullet into Soule's right cheekbone. Soule was dead before help could arrive. Squire dropped his pistol and ran before he could be arrested by the authorities. Squire was turned in and was jailed awaiting trial. He escaped and fled to New York where his father was. Once there he held various jobs, and tried to rejoin the Army but was rejected. Squire then fled to Central America trying to avoid the law. His legs were crushed in a railroad accident and he later died from gangrene in 1869. Despite his crime, he was buried in Mississippi with honors. 10. Remembrance. Captain Soule and Lieutenant Kramer were both buried at Riverside Cemetery in Denver. Native American anniversary events held annually in remembrance of the Sand Creek Massacre begin at the cemetery where representatives from the Northern Cheyenne Tribe of Montana, the Northern Arapaho Tribe of Wyoming, the Southern Cheyenne and Arapaho Tribes of Oklahoma, the National Park Service and History Colorado decorate the graves of Soule and Kramer. 11. In 2012, a memorial plaque was placed by the History Colorado Society on a building at the northwest corner of 15th and Arapaho Streets in Denver. The plaque reads, "At this location on April 23, 1865, assassins shot and killed 1st Colorado Cavalry Officer Captain Silas S. Soule." During the infamous Sand Creek Massacre of November 29, 1864, Soule had disobeyed orders by refusing to fire on Chief Black Kettle's peaceful Cheyenne and Arapaho village. Later, at Army hearings, Soule testified against his commander, Col. John M. Chivington, detailing the atrocities committed by the troops at Sand Creek. His murderers were never brought to justice. 12. See also Hugh Thompson, Jr., a U.S. Army helicopter pilot credited with halting and later exposing the My Lai massacre of 1968. References. She looks back 75 years to the founding of Lawrence, the Kansas City Star, January 13, 1929. Section C. The thrilling narrative of Dr. John Doy, of Kansas, or Slavery as It Is, Inside and Out. Thayer and Eldridge, Boston, 1860. Kansas State Historical Society, Topeka. Tom Benzing, Silas Soule. A Short, Eventful Life of Moral Courage, Dog Ear Press, 2012. Letter of May 9, 1860, written at Coal Creek, Kansas, Tutter, Eldridge and Hinton. Kansas State Historical Society. Healing from Sand Creek. The Denver Post, 20,061,126. Retrieved 20,131,217. Gary L. Robertson, David Fritjof Halas, Written in Blood, Colorado Heritage, Winter 2001, p.25. Silas Stillman Soule, 18,381,865. The Latin Library. Retrieved November 29, 2014. AB The Life of Silas Soule. National Park Service. U.S. Department of the Interior. Retrieved 14 July 2017. Brady, Scott. Desiree Hersek Oberly Lee. Find a Grave. James Tipton. Retrieved 14 July 2017. http www.kclonewolf.com Historisand Creek Biosalasale Biography.html Western Gentry. Denver Ceremony Recalls Sand Creek Massacre. The Denver Post. Retrieved 20,140,608. Carol Turner, Enterprise columnist 20,101,212. On History Silas Soule _Tess Heroism officially recognized. Broomfield. Enterprise. Retrieved 20,131,115. External links Silas Soule at Find a Grave The Sand Creek Massacre. Silas Soule Massachusetts abolitionist at HistoryNet. Silas Soule A Short, Eventful Life of Moral Courage by Tom Benzing. The Life of Silas Soule. Sand Creek Massacre. National Historic Site. U.S. National Park Service. Captain Silas S. Soule, a pioneer martyr. An article originally published in the Colorado Magazine, Vol. IV, May 1927.